mathematics. Now, you see that there is a deep connection between all of these quotations. It seems that many things are connected to many other things, and mathematics seems to be the common link. So on the left, there is an old woodcut, which was a kind of a printing style in Japan in the 17th century. It shows a man throwing up a piece of paper into the air. It becomes a bird and it flies away. So there is a deep metaphor in this, which is that, paper is a man-made item, but it is made from, again, from wood and wood materials. So it comes from nature. Man processes it and makes it into something which uh, we can use as an industrial product. But here we've taken that product and we've again tried to look at it and simulate or learn from nature by trying to fold it into a bird. And eventually, the deeper we looked into nature, the closer it became a bird, so that at some point it became a real bird and it flew away. So it's basically a metaphor, and this really deeply influences my day-to-day thinking as well as my work in landscape. Now, if I think back to my school days, this is how we were taught subjects. So a teacher would come and teach a subject in that designated 40-45 minutes. And the subjects typically were segregated. So you had a teacher who would teach you mathematics. There was a separate art class. Biology was in a class called living organisms. Chemistry and physics were taught in separate subjects, which were science subjects. And sometimes little bit of cosmology or something would come in the higher classes, which was talking about the universe, like solar system and so on and so forth. So we were taught very early on in our schools that, subjects are like this and there are no connections between them. This kind of tends to stay with children for a very long time. And I began to unlearn this during my architecture and then in my professional life. So actually subjects are like this. They are deeply connected to each other. They are not in separate circles with no connections between them. It's actually a very vibrant smorgasbord of things related to each other, where mathematics fuses into biology, which fuses into cosmic understanding, which fuses into computer science, and so on and so forth. And there is, of course, an underlying uh, byproduct of all the subjects, which is art. So nature has a lot of art in it. And this presentation primarily is to talk about how art gets infused into one subject, mathematics. But because my worldview is like this, where I am not able to really separate out subjects and say that, art, and let's look at infusion of art in mathematics. Invariably, what will happen is that in my presentation, you will find that I am talking a little bit about other subjects also and how they kind of interlink with each other. So my journey into this started with that specific technique, like I said, which is of folding. And there is an ancient technique which we all know, which is origami. And there are a few craft classes in school where glazed paper and square sheets of paper are used to teach children to make birds and paper planes and a few small things, which we think of as by and large silly, with little or no connection to all the other serious subjects that are taught in school. So here I'm showing to you an example of a leaf that is opening over a period of time. This is in a cold climate, and the folding is actually able to save energy for the plant. There is a fair amount of chemistry, physics, as well as biology that goes into this, but we are primarily mathematics of the folding. So I'll show you quickly
Ankan, you're muted, I think.
so I think you unmuted me.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So I shifted to another laptop, so I'm having a little
Ah,
trouble
yeah,
with the
yeah.
video.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
So I think I'll carry on so that
Yes.
uh, at least we don't lose any more time.
Yes.
There was a little video here on your left which showed the time lapse of these leaves opening. But on the right, as you can see, there are more examples. There is a Romanesco cabbage, which shows a fractal pattern, which is essentially a tessellation, folding tessellation. There is a praying mantis, which is essentially an insect which has a lot of folds in its limbs. And on the right is a mushroom, which is a Parasola plicatilis, which essentially is like an umbrella, and it's got a lot of little ridges on its surface, which shows that it uses the folds to strengthen its very tiny, very thin cross-section surface. And architecturally, we say that although the material is very thin, but it is self-stable, which means that the folds give strength to a weak material. So as I proceeded with self-learning about this, because there are no formal courses anywhere in the universities or colleges of the world where they teach origami at this level, I started to look at nature and started to try to emulate it in my work. And these are some examples of where I've looked at a centipede and tried to emulate its geometry as well as the folds which are there. And through the geometry and the folds, the achievement of the movement as well as the structural fitness of the creature. This is a mushroom where the underside actually has these ribs. I've tried to replicate those ribs in the study. So a summation of this is being used in nature to increase or decrease the surface area, pretty much like how we use an umbrella. So it's efficient, you keep it in your backpack, but when it's
We can't hear you.
Ankan, I think there is a connection problem. Just wait.
and increase the surface area. Then folds are being used.
So there is connectivity issue.
So should I continue?
Yeah, yeah, please do. Now it's okay. I think in between the connection was a little weak.
Okay, okay. And the third example here is that of a ladybug. So we don't get to see, but the ladybug actually folds its wings inside its carapace, which is the cover. And then when required, it unfurls. So there is a nice Z-shaped structure inside in the wings. And that allows the ladybug to unfold its wings and then fly off. So throughout the human body, we also, you see, we in our body also, we have various portions where we have this kind of folding logic. The eyelid is something which is really visible, so we can see it. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we can start to apply this kind of knowledge that there is a lot of folding around us. And the first example I'm going to give is from geography. So in geography, we are taught about latitudes and longitudes, which essentially help us to map the globe onto a flat surface. So here I've taken the example of an apple and I have put latitudes and longitudes on it. When I unroll it, I get a series of horizontal and vertical lines, which is the same as the latitudes and longitudes which we get in a flattened map of the world. Essentially what we do is that I will connect the nodes between the latitudes and longitudes into diagonals, and then I fold the diagonals. So when I fold the diagonals, I start getting a shape which is sort of like that of the apple. So there is a green apple here that you can see, which sort of looks like an apple. But if I did not stick that leaf, maybe you would say, I don't know, I'm not convinced. But if I increase the resolution, so it's like any image, if I increase the resolution of the folds, then the geometry starts looking increasingly more and more like an apple, as in I start getting the dimples which are there at the top and bottom of the apple. So I continued with my exploration of folds, and there was a plethora of folds, and eventually in my architecture studies, the outcome was that there were these solid geometries which I was trying to simulate. So simple solid geometry shapes like cylinders, cones, spheres, ruled surfaces, and so on. So on the right, there is the torus and sections of torus. So they are toroidal surfaces. And right at the bottom, there is a Muda shape, which is a hyperbolic paraboloid. So I'll give you a quick example. This is an example of 5 different types of creasing patterns which fold into essentially one mathematical geometry, which is a cylinder. So they are all cylinders, as you can see, but aesthetically they all look different. It's because their creasing patterns are different, but geometrically they are all cylindrical shapes. So once we have the cylinder, then we go into the analysis of how we got it. And there you can see that there is a diamond kind of crease pattern which is used. And in origami, essentially everything is folded using 2 lines. One is a mountain and the other is a valley. So a mountain is something which is a fold which comes up towards you, and a valley is something which goes away from you. So it's the same line as a creasing pattern. Everything may be black and white, but then we give them 2 colors. The reds are the mountains, so they pop up, and the blues are the valleys, so they go down. So now here, architecturally, a cylinder can be many things. It can be a vault. It can be a space into which you move in. So here I have analyzed it a little bit structurally. So the bottom image shows that it's kind of like a structure, and I've stressed it. So I put a lot of force in it virtually. And wherever are the blue areas, it is peaceful. And the orange and red areas means that the geometry is actually stressed. So I can optimize the geometry of the folds to make it. Now, how will I optimize? So here a little bit of computation knowledge comes in. So coding and algorithm. Now, I talked about mountain and valley. So essentially, if you think in terms of computer language, which is binary, it's essentially zeros and ones. So when you say, hello, my name is, then the computer puts all of that into a sequence of zeros and ones. So that is how the computer understands our language. So from all the numbers to all the alphabets, everything is essentially a set of zeros and ones. So the same thing happens also in origami, that all the complicated geometries of the world are essentially a set of mountains and valleys, zeros and ones. That's it. So that gives a beautiful sense to you of how computational language is almost the same as this folding language. So I'm showing you this slide again, because in this now, to optimize this piece which has structural strain in it, I can change the geometry locally. So I do a little bit of coding, and here on the top, it shows a little bar of how the parametric coding has happened. And you can see that the cylinder can be distorted. So a uniform cylinder shape is being distorted. So there are now 2 different possibilities that I've shown at the bottom. Many possibilities are there, but I'll stop with these 2. This was a video again. This is a little bit of like a robot which I had created in my master's program. But I think I'll have to move on from this because videos are not this. Okay, so now I'll give you a real example of how nature uses, because we in mother's wombs, then at that time our fingerprints start to get shaped up. So essentially it's like a set of ridges that start happening on the on our skins, especially on our hands and on our feet. And these are a set of coded loops, walls, and arches. So that's the three essential geometric languages that happen. And within it, there are hundreds of little sub patterns that are there, which are endings, enclosures, bifurcations, and islands. So essentially, then when you look at the whole level, there are three levels of coding that happens in this. So you have the first level, where you have this 8 set of basic patterns, and then moving on to little minutiae, level 2, line units, endings, bifurcations, eyes, and then finally we move on to the third level, where we are looking at the micro details. So one thumbprint is shown on the left bottom. If you see, there are 28 numbers shown on this. So what a fingerprinting expert typically does is that he identifies all these unique modules which are there, and through that he's able to. So this is essentially all coding and all mathematics. Again, I had put in a little bit of a video slide here. I'm having to apologize again and again. Sorry, this is not working, but it shows we did a little study in our studio where we actually coded a fingerprint video and how it could possibly work. I'm going to jump from this slightly high level mathematics to something which is very basic level, and we start in school with our connection to geometry using these, which is the 5 theorems of Euclid. So these are the 5 theorems. Essentially, these are axioms, and they are taught to kids as axioms. And then beyond this, let me not talk about, I'll be preaching the choir because all of you are mathematics teachers here. So I'm not going to talk about these, but these 5 axioms are common knowledge, and I think they are taught in grade 6 or 5 or 6. Now there are some complicated things which are beyond these, which sometimes you cannot solve with a ruler, because all the Euclid axioms you can demonstrate with a ruler and a compass. There are some things which you can't demonstrate with a ruler and a compass, but without the ruler and without the compass, you can actually do it with just a square sheet of paper and origami technique. So the first one is trisecting an edge. So it's very difficult to trisect an edge. Very easy to bisect. You can fold in half and you have a bisection. But to trisect, essentially, this is a higher order cubic equation actually. So how you do it is that you fold paper in half first, and then you take the top left and you fold it down so that that tip touches the midpoint, the fold that you created before. So you get a diagonal fold. Now on this diagonal fold, you take the right tip and you fold down so that you have a 90 degree perpendicular to it, and this time you are folding down to the left midpoint. Now what happens after this is that once you've done this, then you realize that what is left on the top left is 1/3 of the edge. So once you have the 1/3, then you are left with the 2/3. So the 2/3 you can half fold, and that essentially gives you a trisected. So here there's another example of a cubic equation being solved where an angle is being trisected. Okay, I think I will move on. So if you Google trisection of an angle with origami, this result will come up. This is a very popular example that origami artists usually when they interact with mathematicians, they talk about for it. And there's another unique problem which is the doubling of the cube. So if you have a given cube and you want to double its, so again, this can be solved using origami. And this is the proof for it. So I'm going to quickly show you some examples from my work, which talk about the different ways in which I have used mathematics in my work. So
Okay,
as a child, I used.
Ankan, sorry to interrupt, but
Yes,
I
sir.
think this session may end
Yes.
any time. So just reminding all the participants that
Thanks.
you'll have to rejoin after this. Yeah, Ankan, please.